Alright, this is one I just wanted to do real quick. It's the, as you can probably tell, it's the combination of movies where there are a group of people, and they take their neighborhood a little too seriously, and upon doing that, find something potentially deadly that they must deal with and come across in very comedic ways. And I'd like to start with The Burbs, which is our Joe Dante movie from 1989, starring Tom Hanks. And there seems to be more of a following for this movie than there was when I first saw it, which had to have been like 15 or so years ago. And me and my brother found it by accident because we were in Florida and all the adults were off doing something else, and so we were alone at the house, and this was coming on, and the only thing we knew was it was a Tom Hanks movie, and it had the plot of like some Are You Afraid of the Dark episode or some Goosebumps book. So we were like, we should probably check this out because we have nothing else to do, and it was kind of a love at first sight thing. And this kind of almost instantly became one of my favorite comedies, and that hasn't really changed since. And so we start off, and we have obviously this very different group of characters from some great actors here, and the setting is this cul-de-sac that we're stuck in. Quite literally, because as Dick Miller says in the movie, there's only one way out. And the whole idea is that it's just mundane suburbia, yet at the same time, there's always something interesting going on just because of the weird shit that the characters do. But to the characters within the movie, this life is mundane. But we're immediately drawn in. And despite all this, and we have Hanks, this was like fresh off his Oscar nomination for Big, but still before he was in full-on drama mode, so he still kind of had that, he still had that knack for that really slapstick comedy that he got from stuff like Bosom Buddies. It's still very apparent here. But the thing about Hanks is he's still, despite the wacky directions his performance can go, he's still playing the straight man to all the stuff that's happening here, which he does perfectly, because we've got Bruce Dern, who stands out the most, and this was the first movie I saw him in, of all things, and he's this ex-soldier who's completely out of his mind, and still his mindset is still there. He's kind of like the Walter Sobchak before Walter Sobchak, and he's got this whole... He's basically got everything still, and we learn from Ray that he is apparently an arms dealer. I can't quite tell if Ray is saying that in jest, or if that's what Rumsfeld's doing now that he's not actually in battle. And then we've got his other neighbor, Art, who is Rick Dukeman, who is the guy that basically gets them all into this because he can't stop. He's just this natural-born busybody, and he's that guy that probably everybody knew, or was neighbors with at some point. And he has this very hilarious opening scene. Apart from him trying to shoot the bird, it's when he's in the kitchen, and he invites himself in, and he's having like a whole bunch of plates of the pancakes they've had, but then he goes into the refrigerator, and there's a couple of little details in there I like that they kind of snuck in, like, when after he's done eating, Carrie Fisher comes to the side of him and she's holding a dog bowl that he doesn't realize that's what he is. He just thinks it's more food, so he just grabs it, and you can see his reaction when he realizes what it is. And then there's a little moment when he takes the empty syrup bottle and walks over and just puts it back in the refrigerator and gets another one. That's when he pulls like the meat out, the ribs. And this movie is just full with those little tiny things that they just kind of slip in there unnoticed like that, unless you've seen it as many times as I have. So, like, I kind of like the stuff, like, when they have, after the Dick Miller, Robert Picardo scene, because it's a Joe Dante movie, obviously, when they throw the garbage in the street, how the garbage in the street is always there for the rest of the movie. Like, we see it again when the Klopeks leave during the day, and when they bring Walter home, how it's all still there. So I like that little detail, and how they kind of kept up that continuity, not just for the continuity, but for the sake of the comedy of it as well. And this movie's different approaches to the way it handles its comedy is also something I think really makes it stand out among comedies. I don't know that I can say similar, because I don't know a shitload of comedies that are very similar to this. But there's the way they use the stuff where they don't necessarily need dialogue, like the physical bits, like the cookies. How it's just this has to be this very well-timed thing to hit just right for this physical gag. And then there's the whole sardine scene, which has very little dialogue in it, and everything comes from just the whole awkwardness of it, and kind of the claustrophobic feel too, because the Klopex's house is so just kind of, it's almost like they're hoarders or something, where everything is just in this one room, and then Hans kind of offers him this, and obviously we know that there's something wrong with them, so there's something in general about taking food from them that seems off. But then it's just the whole idea of just the noises that Tom Hanks makes while this scene is playing out. It's pretty much the only thing we have in sound in this scene. All the way up to his sneezing fit. And it's just perfect with both the way they play with the sound and kind of the dialogue-free nature of it. And the fact that Ruben is just kind of eyeballing him the whole time, and it's just all kind of, it's not necessarily building, but it's all kind of just sets this feel at the very start, and also to kind of, it's just a comedic scene by itself, but also kind of building to this is Bruce Dern in the back corner just tearing the wallpaper off just casually. And there is I also like the detail when they're having tea with the Globex, and he's like, I've lit the candles, to set a romantic tone for the women, and it's like this bonfire in the middle of the table of like 20 candles, and it just kind of shows, it definitely adds an, I guess, eccentric quality to them, but it really kind of toys with that fact with, are they sinister or are they not? And there's the whole, like, Henry Gibson, I think, is just perfect in this, the way he plays it. He's so incredibly friendly. And just the sophisticated way he carries himself. It's kind of like when you see Henry Gibson playing this character, it's like you kind of don't want the Klopex to be evil when you look at him. It's like you want to believe that they're people like this, but then you have the excuse me, Brother Theodore playing Reuben, and he just has this very suspicious hostility just at a constant. I love Bruce Dern's line, about a 9 on the tension scale. And then he calls him Rube for the rest of the movie in every context. And obviously Hans is played by Courtney Gaines, who was Malachi in Children of the Corn, which pretty much says everything you need to know. But still, despite the fact that Hans and Reuben come off very suspicious and kind of off, when you look at Henry Gibson in the scene, Werner Klopek, you kind of start to realize that maybe there's just kind of a combined thing here to where it's like he kind of counters the weirdness of the other two, and it's like, well, maybe they are just a weird family, and that's the end of it. So that's really crucial to the movie. Another character I didn't mention was Corey Feldman as the teenager that's kind of basically acting as the spectator for this whole thing as it all plays out in front of our eyes. He's kind of like acting as an audience with us when he brings Nicky Cat over. And another thing that really makes this movie work a lot is the Jerry Goldsmith score is amazing. And it's kind of got this, it definitely kind of has this kind of old-fashioned horror vibe to it, while also kind of having like almost like very small Morricone tones, which they bring totally in full when they first approach the door and they do the Once Upon a Time in the West scene where they actually play the Morricone music and doing the close-ups of the eyes, including the dog as well. So that's kind of an interesting ode to that. Like, for a while, it was a scene that always kind of stood out to me, but before I'd realized, obviously I saw this long before Once Upon a Time in the West, so it was kind of like, that score actually blended in with Goldsmith's score so much. I never really noticed until I saw Once Upon a Time in the West, and I was like, the Burbs referenced this. I get it. But I talk about how funny it is and how it's definitely one of my favorite comedies for sure. I could watch this for days and laugh at the same things over and over and over again, almost throughout the entire movie. But there are also legit moments in this movie that are kind of eerie. One in particular that stands out is the story of Skip that Art is telling. And just with Art's character and the way Feldman's kind of playing off it, and how they're kind of, you can already kind of tell when this scene starts that they're ribbing Hanks a little bit, because that's the whole setup with he comes over here to smoke cigars so his wife won't see. He doesn't know I know that. And then, but as this scene plays out and we hear Art telling this story, we think it's probably going to be some bullshit story he's telling to freak Corey Feldman out. But then and it's still kind of an eerie story within that, but then Hanks brings into the scene, he kind of walks into this story and says with a serious look on his face, I remember hearing about that and hearing that happened. And you realize that it's actually a legit myth that's in this neighborhood. And it starts to really bring on this eerie vibe. So I've always really liked that scene and how it kind of adds an actual quality to the movie to where not everything is just playing it up for laughs, like this could legitimately be, you know, a scary thing. But then we have stuff, like Ricky's theories about that they're linked to hell. Because we hear a while back, before they moved to this house, their last house completely burned to the ground, and then he tells the story of, he mentions the movie The Sentinel and talks about that, and we get the whole, their address is 669, and when they knock on the door, the 9 turns over, and it's like they really, really build up this, are they just from hell thing? Is it like a supernatural thing? On top of the furnace they have that's constantly going off in the basement. So I like that they toy with these ideas, but there's always that thing of, so where's it going to end up? And yeah, it does kind of suffer from Rear Window Syndrome, where once it gets to the point that it does, there's no surprise, because your only response to it is, well, yeah, what else was it going to be? Like, how else can this movie end? Well, the interesting thing about this movie is that it's, to my understanding, I don't think they shot this, but the actual original script ended with the Twilight Zone ending, the Monsters Who Do on Maple Street ending, where it's like, where it is exactly, like, the big finish is Ray's speech about, it's not them that are the lunatics, it's us, because we're the ones doing all the crazy shit, and they're just in their house, while we're the ones acting insane, and it's this whole kind of turnaround thing where it's like, they're actually normal, and it's the normal people that are insane in the movie. And to my understanding, they just ended it there. But then there was a filmed alternate ending that you can find on YouTube where they kind of work in both, where it's kind of like the Klovecs are guilty, but it's not like the whole fighting on the stretcher thing, where it's, once they arrest Henry Gibson, he has this little monologue saying, like Ray asks him, you know, why did you come to this neighborhood? And his response is the same reason you did, because it's quiet. And we can do whatever we want without, you know, anything getting... And he kind of plays it up like this whole... The way the normal people resent suburbia, the crazy people do in the same way, kind of for the same reasons, even if they do different things behind closed doors. And it is an interesting ending, for sure, but... it's a little... when you look at it, the actual video, it plays off very abruptly. It does have a nice finish where, when Art's just walking away by himself, when all the other neighbors have rejected him, it starts, the Mr. Rogers song starts playing again, which is kind of cool, but for the most part, it does feel like... I mean, when you look at the fact that this could have been a big message movie like that, like a Twilight Zone ending or whatever... Yeah, him fighting Henry Gibson on the stretcher probably looks a bit silly, and it does seem like they just happen to hit the car and the trunk just happens to open. But like I said, though, with the Twilight Zone ending, it felt very abrupt. Like, it just kind of suddenly stops. So, as far as finishing the movie off goes, I do think it's fine with what they've done here. That's another thing about the Goldsmith score is... Obviously, the music playing for that climax was reused in Gremlins 2 when the flying gremlin. So, I always assumed that music just came from Gremlins 2. But the Burbs has the reused music and the music it found that was reused later. It's so yes, but really the one thing to just draw total and complete attention to with this movie is that it's so fucking hilarious. It always has been. It probably always will be. It's been out since 1989. That's a year older than me. And I honestly cannot tell you how many times I've seen this, and we just quote it constantly. There was a dude, at the time, I didn't know him very well, but I knew him a little bit, we just had a whole conversation that was nothing but Bruce Dern's quotes from this movie. And it felt so uniting in a way. So yes, I just can't praise this movie enough. That's the key thing here. It has all these different elements in it, and all these nice little touches, all these subtle little things. Definitely through and through a Joe Dante movie, which 9 times out of 10 is a very good thing. But the best thing of all is that it's just so goddamn funny the whole time, and it always is. And there's even when it takes the different approaches, like I was talking about the subtle stuff, and there's the physical gags. There's also the slapstick stuff. Like obviously Dante has a bit of a kind of a love inside him for Looney Tunes that we come to know, like with their little cameos in Gremlins 2, and then when he just flat out made Looney Tunes back in action. There's stuff in this like Rumsfeld falling off the roof, or when Art falls off the telephone pole and through the shed, and the roof of the shed has an Art-shaped hole in it, and it's so all that stuff is in there, and it just really makes what is very close to being an absolutely perfect comedy, I think. So I've always loved it, always will, and it's just absolute greatness. Now, when you look at The Watch, obviously The Watch doesn't have the same reputation. I don't think The Watch is very well liked. It's been a while. Like, the last time I think I heard The Watch even really discussed was in 2012 when it came out. And then people just forgot it existed. I think it plays on, like, FX occasionally or something. But for the most part, people saw it, people hated it, and they sent it off into the abyss, and then we don't really hear about it anymore. And it's... Well, the thing here is, despite our all-star cast, as well as us having Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg writing the script, I do kind of get where this tends to be. Like, when we watched... It wasn't even that popular, either. I remember vividly when we saw it. It was me, my brother, and Owen. And when we saw it in the theater, which was like its opening day, it was the 3 of us in the back and like 2 people towards the front, and that was it. We're in the back completely laughing our asses off from beginning to end. These 2 people in the front are totally silent the whole time. So I understand that this movie does not really have much of a fan base at all. And obviously, I believe this would have been around the Trayvon Martin thing, I think, because the movie was originally called Neighborhood Watch, and because of that, they had to change it to kind of keep people's minds from going in different directions. So we just have The Watch, which makes sense because that's what Vince Vaughn calls it throughout the movie. And when it begins, we start with Ben Stiller, who's our main character, obviously, who's narrating and telling us about how perfect his world is, his perfect neighborhood, all his different groups. He's obsessed with the idea of diversity, how, like, you know, all of his different neighbors are a different race, and it's like, but I don't have a black friend yet, I need to work on that. And he's on the market, is what he says he is. So he's, like, so thrilled when he meets Richard Ayoade later. And so, but going into this, it's worth noting, obviously, and this is a movie that really makes it stand out, too. It's the whole... There's nobody better than Ben Stiller at playing somebody who is way too into what they do. Whether it's good or bad, whether it's something like Heavyweights or Happy Gilmore or Dodgeball, just anything and everything a Ben Stiller character does. Tropic Thunder. He's unhealthily into everything that he does. And that really comes through here. And then obviously we get this opening with Antonio, the security guard, where it plays up like... it's this one scene, kind of feels like the whole movie of... Remember Career Opportunities with Frank Whaley and Jennifer Connelly when they were like in, what was it, Target or something? So it's basically plays up like the movie's going to be like that, and then suddenly it's this graphic, bloody alien movie. Which they do hint at in the opening credit sequence, because we start in space and then we come down. But I'd like to talk about the characters a little bit before I go back into that. There is obviously Vince Vaughn, and Vince Vaughn is the key to this movie's success, in my opinion, because I bash a lot of comedies lately for doing the same thing, and that is where it seems like they totally ditch a script and just try to improv, and it usually comes out very messy and just not funny at all. Like, it felt like they thought it was hilarious, but none of the dialogue kind of lines up or makes anything coherent, and it's just them trying to be funny with different lines and trying to be, you know, quotable on the internet or whatever, and it just fails. Whereas I don't know how much of this movie stuck to the Rogen Evan Goldberg script. I think there was another writer, but I can't remember off the top of my head who it was. But Vaughn makes this material feel like it's improvised. Like, you can argue, if you look at any interview of him whatsoever, this movie is Vince Vaughn playing Vince Vaughn, and that's it. That's all he does. He just acts like Vince Vaughn the whole time. But there's a big difference, and that's the fact that it's fucking funny. In my opinion, anyway. Like, that is the big difference. That is the one key. Like, you can do the improv thing, but 9 times out of 10, you're really going to fail. And this movie completely lucked out by having a comedic actor doing this that is actually legitimately funny when he's able to just go on tangents by himself. It's his the real asset of him. And so we get stuff like the Russian dolls, which is just like this masterclass in comedy that lasts like 45 seconds, where he's never seen these Russian nesting dolls before, and every time he opens one, he is like genuinely, sincerely surprised to see another one. And by the time he gets to the small one and just has to stop and pause in silence, and it's like, there's no point to the scene whatsoever. It doesn't lead into anything, there's nothing, but it's just so funny and so memorable that it just works as its own thing as a precursor to this scene when Stiller lays down everything. And it's kind of happening simultaneously with Iowati's introduction, so there's that too. I love when he like interrupts the introduction to say, "Hi, look at this." And it just really works for me, this whole character. And then like I said, his lines where it seems like he's just throwing stuff out there, saying that his logo for the Neighborhood Watch with the tiger, the wings, and the fire looks like it's the international symbol for shut the fuck up and dance. These lines are just really funny to me, and that's where I feel like the strength of the movie is that this makes the characters bouncing off each other a lot more appealing than it is in other movies that totally fail at this. And when you've got a strength like Vaughn at his absolute best, just riffing, is being at the center of this group, is where its real strength is, when the 4 characters are together. I'm not saying the movie's flawless, I will get into other bullshit, but then there's also Jonah Hill, who's this character that I think he half works, because it is funny. He's got the crazy eyes, and he's got the whole, he tells us that he didn't pass his mental health exam, or that he doesn't even know what a mental health exam is, and he has these deadpan deliveries. My personal favorite is, he's probably watching us from a distance beating the living shit out of his dick. It's a line I always forget is in there, so it always catches me off guard. And gets me every time. And then we have Iowati's character in here, who obviously completely stands out amongst this other cast. Like I say, all-star cast, and then there's Richard Iowati, because, remember, it's an American movie, and obviously people know Iowati from the likes of the IT Crowd, or those British quiz shows, or whatever, or as an indie director with Submarine and The Double. And he just seems like a totally random choice, especially since we haven't really seen him in an American movie since. But I do think he really works here to kind of combat the very abrasive humor of, say, Vaughn's character and Hill's character, and also being a comedic character going up against Stiller's straight man, and how he kind of has this perverse mentality, but he's downplayed enough to make it work. And because obviously we have a Seth Rogen, Evan Goldberg script, the movie is going to just be drowning in vulgarity, warranted or not, funny or not. But just some of his little deliveries, like stuff that he's saying like as the scene is fading out, that's barely in there. Like when he says, when obviously Stiller realizes he's going to have a black friend, so he gets really excited, and what he says, kind of just in passing, people are usually disappointed when they meet me. So, and I like the way that he sets up pretty much throughout the entire movie the twist that Joe Marcus is an alien, and then you kind of realize, it feels really obvious once you realize it, that the way he's playing his character, it's almost like he's doing his absolute best to blend in. But the great thing that Iowati does here is that we're not really thinking about that through the entire movie, because he plays him so convincingly as just, this is just the way this dude acts. Like, it doesn't really necessarily occur to you, oh, he must be one of the aliens at his skin. I mean, it's blatantly obvious, but you can totally buy that he's just a dude that's just awkward like that, and that when the twist is finally revealed, it's like, yes, that makes total sense. So there's that. And then we have side characters like Will Forte as the cop, and I do like his stuff. When Stiller asked him if, he's gotten any fingerprints, and he's like, whoa, slow down. We've been here for 2 hours. We just finished putting the tape up. Give us a break. And there's also an uncredited Billy Crudup, who is a neighbor that just hangs around and acts very weird and sensual. Which we will get to, which is, another thing I forgot about, the Iwate thing, is, I do kind of like, when you look at the watch, it's not something that's particularly, the whole movie is not something that's particularly clever, but every now and then they kind of toy with some stuff, kind of like, when you notice when they're at Costco and they're kind of scoping people out, when Jonah Hill sees the little kid and says, look at this piece of shit. When they say, we're scoping out, and they say, any one of these people could be an alien, it immediately cuts to Richard Iowati and then cuts away. Once again, it could be totally obvious, but also I do like the way it's almost... This is this movie's best attempts at subtlety, coming from his character, and for the most part, they work for me no matter how obvious they are, but once again, I stress again, this is a Seth Rogen, Evan Goldberg script, so not everything's going to work, and a lot of things are going to be right in your face, and a lot of things are going to be really, really dragged out. Like, the gay angle, a lot of this takes for seemingly no reason, kind of stands out, to where it's... Well, before I go into this, it's worth noting, what I think works the best about the watch is in the first half hour. And the movie's an hour and a half. When it's like the first half hour and we're introduced to them and we're meeting them and they're just doing mundane shit like chasing that teenager that's egging shit, and, Vaughn's just doing his thing, this is when I really think the movie is at its best. It's definitely, after about the 35-minute mark is when it's just not the movie it used to be, and where I think probably a lot of people start kind of disliking it. But I think a lot of that comes from this big shift where the humor tries to get bigger and bigger as it goes. And for Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, bigger and bigger means more and more sexual and vulgar. And so there's this whole gay angle thing that keeps happening throughout the movie. It feels like it's the whole setup for Crudup's character, the way he's just constantly, almost like he's making passes at Stiller, and that's pretty much just all his character does. And then there's the Jonah Hill stuff, where it's like he's closeted or something. And it's just stuff in passing that never really amounts to anything. Like you think maybe it's going to be a build-up to some payoff, but it's not. It's just stuff that's in there to make him weird. Like when they're talking about going to Arlie Ermey's house and confronting him, and like going in incognito, and so Jonah Hill says, I'll dress up as a woman. I'll go in there. I don't mind dressing up as a woman. If I have to do sexual things, I will do that. And there's that, but then there's also stuff like, little things like when they do the hands in the middle thing, and he looks at Stiller and just, yeah, get that pretty little hand in there, and it's like, what are these character traits doing? Like, are they even character traits, or are they just kind of lame jokes that are in there to say, ambiguous sexuality, I guess, even though it's not really all that ambiguous, the way he just keeps going about it. The way, when they see Nicholas Braun buying the condoms, and he just becomes obsessed with his dick for the rest of the movie after that scene. And it just kind of, it really brings the character down. I much preferred the whole, he's just kind of he's oblivious to the fact that he's a psychopath angle. The whole gay thing just kind of stuck out and felt weird, and maybe possibly a bit homophobic. And there's also stuff like the stuff that still to this day makes me self-conscious. It's funny enough, this lines up with the fact that in about a week or so you'll be getting your first Oscar prediction video from us, our annual thing. And there's a scene in this movie that I always can't help but think back to whenever we do that stuff, and that is the scene when they go to Billy Crudup's orgy, and the Lonely Island is there. One of those guys is the director of the movie, and they're circle jerking in the kitchen, and they're saying, I think Andy Samberg says something like, oh my god, the cinematography is amazing, it's so gonna win Best Picture, and that's what they're talking about, is they're circle jerking each other. And it's like, I understand the joke you're making here. I can't tell if it's talking about the likes of people like us that do the whole Oscar thing and really get involved in it, or if it's more people like, maybe more people like those internet critics that you see where it's like, 2-minute videos they call an analysis, and it's them, like, screaming and jump cutting at the camera to say, like, this is good, you know, cinematography's good, acting's good, the end. And it's like, maybe it's a take on those people. It's like, we'll go with that. But yes, just so you know, weird as it is, that scene comes to mind every fucking time we do one of those videos, because I'm afraid it's like, is that the way people see us? Is the Lonely Island sitting in a kitchen turkey? It's like, I really hope not, but okay. And so, yeah. So, as you can probably guess what I was saying about that first half hour thing, this is kind of the whole... I like the whole neighborhood watch aspect of it. It's kind of when it turns into an Alien movie, to where it's kind of like, it feels like this was going in a certain... Obviously, it builds up like that, but I mean, when you look at it, you're like, you kind of see a different movie in it without the alien stuff. And it's like, maybe it could have been better. Maybe it would have had more opportunities for comedic situations, but now we just have to deal with this alien thing, and that becomes the full plot for, like, the last hour. And this is when it kind of loses itself, and it kind of feels like... Just the year before this, we'd seen the, you know, amazingness that was Attack the Block. So it almost kind of felt like they were trying to do that, and like an American version of that, but not even close. Like, not even remotely close. It is great that you have Doug Jones in here doing his thing, and that's fantastic. That always adds some kind of merit to it, even if, like, Doug Jones' name itself added a little bit of validity to the Bye-Bye Man, just because he was in it. But maybe the only thing, but still. But still, once it reaches this point, the movie just kind of goes off. It's not near... there's still funny stuff in there, but it's not near as funny, but it feels a lot more repetitive. It feels like the jokes are definitely in the same place. A problem Rogen has a lot, and Goldberg. That was my problem with This Is the End, where it felt like the humor was just all in that one vulgar place and didn't really branch out and try to do other things. It was all just, you know, dicks and cum, just constantly. Obviously, it's like, oh, the slime is like cum, and then it's like, oh, their weakness is their dicks, and it's like, this has Seth Rogen's name all the fuck over it. You can tell. And they throw in a lot of filler stuff, like, the whole stuff with Stiller can't have children, and then the whole thing with Vince Vaughn's daughter and all that. Obviously, that's kind of building up the whole Nicholas Braun as an alien thing, but it really doesn't matter in the long run, and it's like, you realize just how much filler it was. And there's the whole... Rosemary DeWitt is, like... just the wife character for a long time, and then suddenly she joins them, and it's nice that they didn't just write her off as the wife character. She got to do the stuff, but it's like, it just feels so out of nowhere and so abrupt that suddenly she's just completely in this now. So that fell off, and then it kind of like, you look at the daughter stuff and you look at the kids stuff, and it's like, this is a movie that, I mean, I know usually you want to praise movies for building up their characters and stuff like that and making well-rounded characters, but you look at this stuff they're building up supposedly for the sake of character, and you're like, this is the kind of movie that really doesn't need that. Like, it really doesn't. Like, that stuff is really just taking up room here. This is one of these movies that doesn't need these serious moments of Ben Stiller saying, I can't have kids, and Vince Vaughn trying to connect with his daughter. And it's like, this is a movie that just needs to be wall-to-wall, the neighborhood watch, getting into shit. We really don't need the side stuff. We really don't need character sob stories for a movie like this. We really, really don't. There is so much room you could put more comedic situations in this, but like I said, I think the alien setup kind of bankrupts it after a while, and it doesn't, there's not enough to do except say, oh, you know, let's shoot the aliens in the dicks, and oh, their slime feels like that's all they can do. So that's a bummer. It's kind of like the year after this when we had The World's End. It's kind of like the whole alien approach. There's just certain ways to do that, and comedies seem to have a really hard time pulling it off. I remember Attack the Block having a lot of comedy in it, but I also remember feeling like Attack the Block felt almost exclusively like kind of a sci-fi monster movie, and I think that's really why it works so much. And here, it's just... yeah, it just feels like it kind of runs out of gas and really takes it in a direction that takes it away from the whole thing. Kind of like, it almost feels like, take out the real-life controversy, renaming it from Neighborhood Watch actually feels also better, because if I were to see a movie starring these four, and this is what the poster was, and it was called Neighborhood Watch, an alien movie doesn't come to me. I imagine the four of them doing what we see them doing in the first half hour, and the hilariousness that comes from that, but obviously they completely went off the rails, and so I totally understand that it's like a totally hated movie. But it's still just funny enough for me that I've seen it a few times, so... and the moments that are funny are really damn funny, so... There is that, but it's also, it's got a lot of Rogen's weaknesses in it and Goldberg's, so that's what that is. So, yeah, long story short, I just wanted to gush about the Burbs. And oh, by the way, the watch isn't that bad to me anyway, but, so yeah, that's what we have. Next week, my brother will be with me, and we were gonna do 2 movies out of a franchise, one against the other to see which one was the best of this franchise, but then he gave me the idea, why don't we just do the whole thing? So this is what we're going to do. We're just going to talk about a whole franchise and decide which one's the best movie in it. So, that, and then obviously tomorrow is the reviews for Wind River and Baywatch and a couple of others. And then next week is a really big week, so, but you'll see all of that later. So, in the meantime, we're done.